Hello, and welcome to the Business as Usual podcast, which is part of the Edify podcast network. This podcast is aimed at students across the UK and internationally studying GCSE, BTEC or A-level business, and is the only educational business studies podcast in the UK. It covers a series of news stories in the current business world and topic studies so you can revise key theories and learn more about real-world businesses. My name is Jack Goodrich and my co-host is Mike Sawyer. We are both teachers in schools in the UK. This is episode 17 and is about human resource management and how businesses and governments are responding to the crisis of the coronavirus. In particular, we're going to look at the Govt Job retention scheme and what furloughing actually is. Let's get started. So Mike, what is human resource management first of all? I think it's important to make sure we know what human resource management is before we look at how it's been affected.
Yes, definitely. Human resource management is a very broad topic. There's many degrees that you'll go on to possibly do that will have the bulk of it being around human resource management. So it includes many aspects such as recruitment and selection. It looks at training of the employees you actually already have. It looks at knowledge management, so retaining some of the knowledge and skills that your current staff have if they leave. It looks at the management of staff. So you'll have looked at maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Hertzberg and motivating staff and just the general organization of staff within the business, putting the right people in the right place at the right time. So it's a really broad function of the business, possibly one of the most broad.
Yeah, I guess it's when you think about recruitment, that's obviously if you're bringing in new members of staff and selection training are a part of that recruitment process. We're probably looking more at the management and organisation side of things because the reason we're focusing on that now is because of the coronavirus, because of everything that's going on and businesses being shut because we're on a lockdown. We need to have a look at how businesses are managing their staff. And, chances are a lot of people who are listening to this have probably got family members who are involved in these schemes that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's a tough time for a lot of people out there at the moment. Even people that perfectly healthy and haven't been touched by the virus at the moment. Just the interruption in normal daily lives and not being able to go to work, etc., not being able to go to school. Obviously, we're going to focus on the not going to work part of it. So I guess we should probably start with how it impacts businesses and how they need to then or are looking at their management and organisation of staff.
Yeah, so the question we asked when we were thinking about this was why is it difficult to manage staff now? And the main reason for that is businesses have got very, very little or no revenue. A lot of businesses have been closed, and unless they're an essential business, so like supermarkets, obviously hospitals, schools to some extent, or provide an essential service, they've pretty much been told to close. But like bars, restaurants, a lot of retail stores have closed their physical premises and are just operating online. And so given that businesses either have less revenue or no revenue, they will have to cut costs to survive. And that one of the most common costs to be cut when a business is looking to cut costs is staff. Especially if a business is closed, they might not need all of their staff, or they might not have staff who can work from home. For example, if you work in Topshop or Primark. Primark's an example we're going to look at later on. You can't necessarily do your job from home, and so therefore, what do you do with these staff when you don't need them?
Yeah, definitely. They say that staff are your biggest asset, but also your biggest cost, don't they? So you have to manage them well to get the most out of your assets. But if you're closed down, there is very little you can do. So we're just going to be looking at the few options they do have to reduce their capacity.
Yeah, and the key thing here is obviously staff are the biggest asset, and when this lockdown's lifted, which I don't know when it'll be, hopefully it won't be too soon, but also hopefully it won't take too long, because obviously the longer it takes, the more risk there is to businesses. But these staff that we don't need now, we will need when things open again, when stores open again, and we have customers to serve. I think one particular area of business that's going to definitely need their staff is hairdressers, because from what I've seen, this isn't a problem that you're going to have.
Not for me.
But a lot of people taking their beard trimmers to their heads are going to need some hairdressers to fix those messes. I had my second home haircut yesterday, which was basically just shaving it all off, which is a bit frightening as a
Safe
concept.
option.
But yeah, you're a veteran of that process. But there's going to be, there's a need for these employees to come back when this is over. And so the question is, the common thing that happens when a business needs to reduce costs is they'll make redundancies, where basically they cut staff that they don't need. And the concept of redundancy is that those staff members aren't needed. Well, these staff members aren't needed right now, but they will be in the future. So do you want to explain briefly what the government have done to try and encourage businesses to keep staff, but also reduce their costs so that they can actually survive throughout this lockdown?
Yeah, so like you say, the normal way of the world in business would be to make redundancies, which is, like you say, where you pay them a severance package, possibly, or if they've been working for very long, they can be made redundant for very little, if not nothing. So that is a normal way of the world, but that would then mean you'd have to go through the whole recruitment selection process, which would be huge, again, when we then open up again. So that wouldn't be very efficient for the business, and also the government don't want to be seeing unemployment rates go through the roof, and then the burden would therefore all be on the welfare state, wouldn't it? So it's going to cost the government in some ways. So they've decided on a different scheme, which they've called the furlough scheme. So I mean, furloughing is a term that's been around. It's just very rarely used. So it's essentially when you're making people redundant
it's like a leave of absence, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you give someone a
granting them yeah.
Kind of. So it's you're laying people off. It's almost, you could say, where your 0-hour contracts kind of maybe were born from. It's for flexible employment. So they've looked at this scheme and thought, well, we could give the funding to businesses so that they don't have to actually make any redundancies. So they can then open up as soon as we have the lockdown is ceased. And then business as usual, they hope. So they're going to pay
I like that you've got the business as usual in there.
So they're going to pay 80% of the salaries of employees for firms that furlough their staff. So they tell them to go home. You'll have 80% of your wage paid or salary paid up to £2,500 by the government. And then what we will do is we will then top up the 20% extra, or if it depends on your contract, you will have to survive on 80% of your salary. Now, given the circumstances, I think a lot of people are pretty relieved with having 80% of their salary guaranteed. So yeah. A lot of people have accepted the furlough, but I mean, you mentioned earlier to me, didn't you, that you were surprised that people have to actually accept it. It's not something you can force on your staff, but it's a risky business. You kind of have to accept it,
don't you? Because if you reject it and they can't afford to keep you, they're going to make you redundant. So yeah, the scheme's actually called the Govt Job Retention Scheme, and that really speaks to what its intention is. Its intention is to retain jobs. And so although in some respects it's similar to redundancy in the fact that the business won't have to pay the salaries because that will be paid by government, or at least 80% of the salary, they effectively are making them, it's like a temporary redundancy from the business perspective, because they will not have to pay those staff. Now, the key thing with a furloughed member of staff is, first of all, obviously they're receiving 80% of their salary, but because they're furloughed, they can't work. And so anyone who has been furloughed can't actually provide any work to the business for a period of time. And so it's a scheme that's available for 3 months at the moment, and it might potentially get extended if the lockdown gets extended. And it's backdated from the 1st of March. So until the end of June, this is available. And so some businesses are furloughing staff in terms of they're sort of staggering it. So maybe a few departments, or maybe a third of their workforce that can be furloughed, getting furloughed for the first month, and then others for the second month, etc. Some are just furloughing them for the entire time if they know that they're not going to need them at all until the end of June. And I guess at the end of June, the government will look at it again and figure out whether it's still needed, and potentially expand it or extend it if they need to. But the way it works is that the business is still going to pay the staff at the 80% who have agreed to be furloughed, and then they're going to reclaim that cost of those members of staff from the government, and they should be that money should be available from government at the end of April. Now, obviously, that represents a few problems in the fact that a lot of businesses might not have the money now, especially if they're not receiving any revenue. But that's the intention, and it's definitely not a perfect system. But I do think that, generally speaking, in a time of complete crisis, I've been quite impressed with the with the level of support the government's offering to businesses. But then it has no choice, does it?
Yeah, I mean, they're predicting we're going to see a 20% drop in GDP, aren't they, in this quarter? But I think it's going to be bigger than that. I can't imagine it's only be 20%. But yeah, they're trying to minimise the pain, essentially, aren't they? The only problem that I've heard with the furlough scheme, other than when the money's going to get there, is that it only can be done with staff that were there before February. So there's a handful of staff that will have switched jobs, say, in February, March, early March kind of time, and they are not covered under the scheme. So, but I mean, there's a bit of a groundswell, a few petitions going on to try and get that changed, which would seem fair. But yes, they have no choice really. I mean, there are a number of options you can do, like we were talking about in America, weren't they, where they've done the universal basic income, and they've seen a huge increase in unemployment, biggest ever in history. So yeah, there's different ways of doing it.
The downside of that is that when the lockdown is lifted, there's no guarantee those people are going to get jobs, and so therefore they might be on benefits, they might be on the welfare system for a period of time after that.
Definitely.
Especially if businesses have struggled over the lockdown months, they might not be able to employ all of their staff again. Whereas in the UK, hopefully, what it should mean is that once this is over and businesses are fully operational, there shouldn't be job losses. I mean, that's pretty much what the government's objective was, wasn't it? To not have any job losses due to the coronavirus.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at it's interesting, I should say, to look at the short-term, long-term effects on the business. I mean, in the short term, the American system is better for businesses because they don't have to pay out staff that they can't afford to. Whereas the UK businesses are now very worried that they've furloughed staff and that the government have got stipulations, small print, etc. You mentioned one of them where they're not allowed to produce any work whatsoever from that date.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of businesses have furloughed staff and then asked them to do light duties at home.
Then they're technically not furloughed.
Yes.
So I live with my girlfriend and her sister and her sister's fiance, and my girlfriend's sister's been furloughed from her business, and she was furloughed. I think she's been furloughed for about a week. This is the second week now, and she's basically getting paid 80% of her pay, up to £2,500. She earns more than that a month, and so I think the remainder of that, up to the 80% of her salary, is being topped up by the 2,500 is coming from the government, but then the remainder of the 80% is being topped up by the business. And she's not allowed to do anything for the job. She's not at work, and I think she's on it for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then it's reviewed at the end of that period of time. Maybe other staff will be furloughed, and she'll take their place, so that it's on a rotation. I'm not sure, but obviously some businesses are operating, aren't they? Some businesses don't necessarily need this. Some businesses are able to operate entirely online, for example, e-commerce based businesses, or businesses where staff work from home or are able to work from home effectively. I have a friend of mine from university who works for Aon Insurance, who is able to do his entire job from home, and so from what I gather, there's no furloughing at all at Aon, because and which is fantastic, because it means that all of those people are still able to get their full amount. Also, it's an insurance firm, so I imagine they've been very busy with coronavirus related claims and what have you.
Definitely. I mean, it's going to be a huge burden on the state, isn't it? It's going to put government borrowing through the roof. So yeah, any businesses that can afford to not access the scheme, such as the government support for the furloughing scheme and for the business grants and loans, etc. It's best if they can resist. Yeah.
Well, that segues nicely into the thing we were going to talk about next, which is the approaches by different companies. And there's one in particular that's been really prominent in the news over the last week, which is football clubs. Now, Premier League football clubs, especially here, because a lot of the lower league football clubs don't actually make a profit, and so therefore it makes sense that they might need to access this scheme. But there's been 3 Premier League teams that have said they're going to furlough staff. One of them being my always disgraceful, thanks to Mike Ashley, Newcastle United, but Spurs and Liverpool as well. So there's a controversy about that, isn't there?
Yes, because I mean, Liverpool went back on their initial decision, but Spurs have stuck with it. So
have Newcastle, yeah.
Have Newcastle gone back on it, or have they stuck with it?
No, they're stuck with it. You're not going to change Mike Ashley's mind.
Well, I didn't expect it, but you never know. Pigs can fly. but yeah, so Spurs decided to furlough their admin staff, their low pay, what they said, their lower skilled staff, and they
Is that what they
decided,
said?
yeah, that's what Dan Levy said.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, he's not. He's a bit like Mike Ashley, but with a slight, a bit more emotion.
He's less prominent than Mike Ashley, but
Yes,
clearly reads the same ethics books.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, but he decided not to seek any assistance or ask for any pay cuts from his players,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
has caused issues.
Newcastle did the same. So they've furloughed all of their, pretty much everyone who's not involved in the first team, really. So we have no scouts, we've got no recruitment staff, we've got no. I think we've got maybe like a skeleton staff. So a skeleton staff is where they talk like the minimum amount of staff that's required to keep a business operational. So they've got like some social media guys and some marketing guys and some of the ticket office and stuff like that. But generally everyone has been furloughed. Most people have been furloughed within Newcastle United, but obviously the Premier League footballers haven't. And the reason that this is controversial is Newcastle United made a profit of like 19 million last year, and in about 3 months' time, if things happen as normal, the transfer window is going to open, and now Newcastle don't spend that much money, but like it's going to be hard for people to stomach when effectively taxpayers pay for this furloughing scheme through our tax revenue. And you've got a club like Newcastle United, a business like Newcastle United, who are going to spend, say for example, they spend £15 million on a footballer. How is it you can justify spending £15 million on a footballer when you've required taxpayer support to pay 80% of the salaries of your members of staff? Like, it's just ethically, it's atrocious, really, isn't it? And that's why Liverpool went back on it within about 2 or 3 days. They realised how much of a mistake they'd made, because it's just a PR nightmare. Dan Levy and Mike Ashley clearly don't care what people think of them, which is
sorry
quite
if you heard me
obvious.
laughing just then. I just had a funny story come through about Daniel Levy. He's been caught having the what do they call them? The people that do the pitch, the groundsman, doing his garden.
Yeah. Has he really?
That's brilliant.
Are they on furlough?
I don't know, mate. I honestly don't know.
They're not fixing White
It
Hart
came
Lane or
up on
whatever
my
it's
phone.
called. But, man. But like, I mean that's legal, by the way, because if you're an employee technically and your director's registered address counts as company property.
Does it really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, it's true. So let's have a look at some others as well. So Primark, they said that they were going to pay full pay to all their staff for 2 weeks, but then move them to furlough from the start of April, and so therefore their staff are on the government job retention scheme. But in one move that has drawn quite a lot of positive publicity, all of their executives have agreed to half their pay. So they're basically saying we'll take significantly less as well, so that we can pay off full staff for 2 weeks. Obviously, Primark, interestingly, don't have an online store. So Primark, one of the few fashion businesses that don't operate online, and therefore obviously missing out on the ability to sell things online at the moment. Any others?
See this as an opportunity, wouldn't you?
Well,
Get
they've just never done it.
On the website.
They've never done it, because their perspective with Primark was always that part of the appeal to Primark was the ability to go into a Primark, come out with a bag full of clothes for like 20 quid, and just feel like you've got that huge value for money, which you don't get when you look at a like shopping basket on a website. So they've always resisted online selling for that very reason.
That sounds like an overrated feeling.
Yeah, I mean that maybe it's a bit outdated. That's what they've been saying for years, though.
I get the
idea behind it, but
yeah.
You look at a business like ASOS, for example, who I imagine are still getting huge amounts of sales, because you've got a lot of people who are just sat at home with nothing else to do but go through their ASOS app and buy loads of clothes.
Yeah, spend 8% of
Amazon
money.
Amazon are obviously probably doing really well out of this as well.
Yeah, Amazon come out and said they're so busy that they've essentially delisted a lot of stuff apart from essentials, because they're so busy.
Well, they recruited new members of staff. They had a recruitment drive in, I think it was Essex. They had a recruitment drive because they've got a warehouse in Essex somewhere.
They're definitely the winners out of this.
They're definitely some of the winners. Yeah, British Airways aren't. They obviously, as a travel company, are finding that demand is pretty much non-existent at the moment. They've furloughed pretty much everyone, but the feedback from staff through their trade unions has been that they're pretty happy with this, because they need to keep their jobs alive, and they're recognising that many businesses in the travel industry could completely collapse because of just a huge lack of demand, and obviously the running costs of running an airline are pretty high.
Oh, definitely. But the thing is, though, do you really think that we're gonna all be going on holiday again or at least many people, we're going to be sitting on planes again
It'll
this
be
time
interesting to
next
see
year.
how that changes for at least in the short term.
I reckon it's going to be a couple of
There's
years.
two perspectives, isn't there? There's the lack of there's not wanting to take the risk, and then there's also the I've been stuck inside my house for 6 weeks or whatever it will end up being, and I'm desperate to go and see. There might be like a new appreciation for holidays and new appreciation for other cultures and stuff. I mean, if you go through Instagram, it's just pictures of people on holiday saying like throwback to when I was able to leave the house and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So maybe it'll go one of two ways, but I
I
think
think it's
some
the
people
cruise liners that are going to go under, if any.
they'll struggle. No one will want to be stuck on a cruise liner.
Plus, they're going to get zero help, I think, because they were all registered into different islands, aren't they,
Yeah,
for tax purposes and stuff. So,
yeah.
mm,
Let's have a talk about some self-employed stuff as well then, because all of this government retention scheme is great for the businesses that have employees, but if you're a self-employed person, if you own your own business, then you don't benefit from that government job retention scheme. So how does it work for those self-employed?
well, the self-employed have to show their tax returns, don't they? And they'll get an average of, I think it's 2 or 3 years. I'm sure you'll
3 years,
confirm which
yeah.
is 3 years, is it? Yeah. So, I mean, that's a problem though, because especially for people that have only just started. So you mentioned you knew someone who just started recently.
My
Um,
brother, yeah, my brother.
Yeah, my brother's done the same. I think, what'd you say? Yours is electrics, and my brother's doing gas. I could set up together.
Yeah, so it's
Um,
utilities, so obviously it's
mm,
essential service. But yeah, my brother took over his. He started a company in May last year, and so they're making a profit, but they haven't published a profit because they haven't got to their first publishing date. They haven't got through their first financial year, and so as a result, there's no evidence of that they've made a profit. There's no reliable evidence because they've not been going on for 3 years of how much they earn per month, and so as a result, they can't claim any of these grants.
yeah, so there's actually a lot more. I mean, they said 5% when old Rishi Sunak actually made the announcement. 5% of people would not be able to access the schemes, but I think it's much higher than 5%. If we look at the people that got their jobs in February and March, and then you throw them in with the companies like that have just set up, like mine and your
Yeah.
brother, and then throw in all the limited companies that have taken advantage of the tax system by taking dividends instead of paying themselves salaries, so they've been posting zero profits. They can't get the loans. There are a hell of a lot of people that these systems aren't gonna help in the end.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's the difficulty of. It's one of the reasons you wouldn't want to be the chancellor at the moment is having to find a way of sort of helping as many people as possible, which is obviously a very very difficult job. All right, I think that pretty much covers what we wanted to talk about. Just sort of give it. I mean, I texted a friend of mine about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I asked him if he was being furloughed, and he's a business graduate who works in a large multinational company, and he'd never heard of the word furlough. And so I think there's probably a lot of students out there who are looking at this and thinking, right, I keep seeing this furlough word, but I don't actually know what it means or why businesses are doing it. And so hopefully this has answered some of those questions that you didn't know you had.
Definitely. I would
We'll
love to
be
bust out the other term that people struggle with, the old mothballing, when you're putting the machinery away when you're quiet to reduce capacity. So furloughing is like the labour version of mothballing, which is for the capital. Just
yeah.
random fact.
Maybe I think we'll do a topic study on capacity utilization because it's something that quite a few people ask about. We're going to try and do a few more things over the next few weeks as well, give you some sort of revision things as well. Less to do in the news because realistically the only thing that's in the news is this. And so we'll try and do a bit of revision stuff. I asked a few people on Instagram to give me suggestions as to what they wanted me to cover. And so we've got a little bit of a list that we're going to work through over the next few weeks. But until then, make sure you stay safe, make sure you stay at home. I'm not going to do the whole stay home, protect the NHS, etc. thing,
You
but
just did.
you know that you
Save
need
lives.
to do it.
I got finished
Yes, well, thanks. So we'll try and do something else maybe later this week or early next week and try and get something out a little bit more regularly, just to give you your dose of business studies revision as you go through this lockdown before you get back to school. Stay safe, everyone.
Yep, stay safe, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Usual podcast, part of the Edify podcast network. If you want to keep up to date with what we're posting, consider following us on Twitter at Mr. J Goodrich and at Mr. M Sawyer, or on Instagram at businessasusual_.